All right, so welcome everybody to today's SDS Physical Design webinar. It's Dwayne and I are going to be the hosts, and what we're going to be talking today is about conduit. We're going to be talking about the below-grade conduit runs. We're going to talk about 3D sketch conduit and some above-grade conduit. At the end, we're going to look at conduit drawings and do an alternate plan view. So these are the key things we're going to talk about today. We're going to have a question and answer at the end. So if you have any follow-up questions, you can contact myself, Dwayne, or go to support if it's a support issue. Some of the key things I want to talk about is a little bit on how busy the conduit can get. You can see in this spaghetti picture, they call it, how much conduit can be placed. So this is why we want an alternate plan view at the end. We're going to be talking about that drawing, an alternate plan view drawing. We're also going to be talking about 3D conduit. The reason we want to talk about 3D conduit is about these bends. When you're laying conduit, they will bend it in the trench. They will also raise and lower it by sloped angles in the trench as well. And this is why we want to get more 3D conduit functionality. So that's what we're working on for our April release. And this is an example of the alternate plan view on how to do a plan view drawing of your conduit. If you have your conduit like that spaghetti picture we showed earlier, it would be a very busy drawing of thick black lines of ink that are going to be difficult to decipher. So what we're going to do is look at a method to get this type of plan view. This is from Inventor, this drawing, and that's what we're going to look at getting to. When we talk about the conduit runs today, we're going to be doing the conduit methods that are all found in the Substation Design Suite help files and e-learning site. So when we come into here, if you want to see another version of placing conduit, maybe a little more detail of what you want, we have a video here that would help you with that. We also have in the e-learning that is a paid site that we step through the conduit, placing conduit as well. I'd recommend this as well as this video we're watching now. So this is a substationdesignsuite.com, and this is the e-learning site as well. So I want to stress on where to get this information other than this webinar. What I also want to bring up is what we did to prepare for this webinar. So what we have here is my demo assembly. This is an assembly that I play with. I add different things. And you can see some conduit runs in here in nice silver color. Typically I like the default color for the conduit. For a lot of things I like the default appearance, I should say the word. And you can see the conduit running here, and we're going to run some of this conduit, and you can see how we're going to run different things. You can see they have different radius elbows, because in the real world we will have different radius elbows available to us. We want to show the method for that. We're going to show how we can get it very accurate to connect to our risers coming out of the ground to connect to our cabinetry or whatever device we're hooking up to. We're also going to show about the 3D conduit run. You can see this sloped here, and this is what I'm trying to mimic, is being able to create these sloped 3D conduit runs. And I think it's more accurate to what actually happens in the field at times, so we want to have that availability. So those are some of the key things we want to talk about today. And when we look at this model here, you can see, if I'm going to collapse it all, we're going to look at how this is built. We have the site skeleton here. We have the above grade, we have the below grade, and we have a control cubicle. So what we're looking at is a process, a method of organization of that tree. The rule of thumb is the smaller the tree, the better performance is your assembly. So what we want is a small tree. We want it organized such as this, so that we are able to do this type of work. If you look at the substation modeling strategy, it talks precisely about that. Running this conduit, we had to prepare for the elbows and other items in the flex conduit that we'll be talking about in the above grade conduit. So for us to do that, we had to get into the SDS content editor. And for those who aren't familiar with this, I will be having my next webinar will be on the content editor, and we'll be talking about we'll spend 40 minutes talking about this. It's also in our e-learning, the content editor, so I would recommend you to look at the e-learning in there too. And there's also a new document on the website on content editor. It's been updated from our old automation force document, and it's a newer and improved version. So let's look at what we have in here. If you're not familiar, we have all our metadata in here for when we run cables, conduit, trench, and that. And what we're going to be looking at specifically is the conduit straights. We're going to look at conduit straights. We're going to look at conduit elbows. And if you look at this, they are in families. If you look in here, they're family of groups. So you can see I got a conduit elbow 1.125 by 7.25, and it's the same family as up here. It's the same family, so we have the family name. I'm trying to stress the family, I think, there. The other thing too, we have the flex conduit, and we're going to be looking at the flex conduit, and you got PVC, EMT, and RMC. We'll be talking about that. So the other thing I want to mention is the that we check that our elbows are in here. We can have as many elbows as you want. You can have 45, 15-degree elbows, whatever those elbows are. So you can see that in the straights, we have our families in here. I'm just going to repeat this a little bit. We have our families in here, different radius elbows, and we come into our elbows, and we have those families. Here's a radius family of 10.5, and down here we have a 2-inch with a radius of 24-inch. You can buy the customized elbows, and you can buy the standard off-the-shelf elbows. The other item in here is what we want to get to is the flexible bus. So when I'm running the bus for above grade, what I've been doing is adding items into the flexible bus, and you're going to see it when we do the job here, how we're leveraging the data. We want to get the metadata for the conduit. I said flexible bus, flexible conduit. We want to get the information across that the metadata in the tour conduit, so to tell our bill of material what it is. We all know we have the PVC bell-end conduit for underground, but as soon as we come above ground, we have a different type of conduit. We'll have the EMT conduit, we'll have the RMC conduit, different types. And if for you guys to know, it's rigid metallic or electrical metallic, and the electrical one is welded, so it's not used too often for above grade outdoors. And we have the RMC. So I add these in here so that we have these choices. It's not all your flexible conduit that you think of you're bended with the black and outer layer, but this can be still a rigid conduit, but we're using the flex conduit tool for this. So I just wanted to show what we had done ahead of time to prepare for creating these. As you can see again in here, we are bringing down conduit. We're going to bring it from an above grade location and bring it into a above grade down here, and we're going to draw a path, and it's going to be under our grade. So if you follow a substation modeling strategy, we have the XY plane here, and that's top of concrete typically. And you can see our conduits running underneath. The other piece of conduit we're going to run is this one here. This is a 3D conduit in here, and if you look carefully, you can see it sloping up and bending. A lot of times when we're running conduit, we're going to see that type of item. So what we were showing here with these conduit bends, especially this one, a lot of times you're not using an elbow to change your grade. You're just going up a slope in the trench. So we're going to be able to do that as well. So that's what this one is here showing. So if I come into my underground, my below grade items, and I can come into my conduit, I'm going to open this up, And here you can see how much that is sloping in the below grade to come up. It's coming very deep and it's coming up. So we just put that in there just for the 3D example. All right, so this is where we're trying to get to. So let's close that and let's reopen this guy. And this is what we're going to work at. So right now we have this. This is going to be our little play, our play tool. And we're going to come in here and do some work. So let's take off the visibility of this conduit right now because I don't want to get distracted by it. So I'm just going to turn off the visibility for now. So what we want to do, we're looking at this and we're going to say, well, we want conduit to run from this box. And this is directly out of the training that we do. We want to get from this box. We want to get down to this box. All right, just simple thing like that. All right. Oh, we're up to 53 people. So what we tend to do is take the information from the above grade, put it in the skeleton, and then bring it forward to the skeleton, using the skeleton, bring it forward into our conduit. So the first thing I'm going to do is look at my skeleton. If you recall, it's a skeleton of work planes, and I kind of showed that earlier. Right, we have our work planes in here, and this is what I'm attaching islands to, or bay assemblies, whatever I need to attach to. And it's also these planes are referenced. We can reference them in our drawings. We can reference them in other models and take dimensions from them. So it helps us locate things. That's why we want to use the skeleton repeatedly. So I'm going to come in here and edit the skeleton. So now I'm editing the skeleton, and I'm going to have a projections on our skeleton. So let's say I'm going to create a new sketch on the XY plane, because we're going to keep that as our reference plane. Top of concrete usually, but we're going to keep it as our reference plane. So now we have this available. I have the other sketch for backup, but right here, this is what we're going to use. And you can see our pieces that we need to add to connect to. So I know I have my cutout points in my box right here. So I'm going to project my conduit points in here. And right away we see that when we bring that in, right away we see on our screen, if I move it correctly, that it's going to interfere with our foundation. So we can see that. We're not worried about it right now. We just want to know where that location is. The other area we want to come into is down in here, and we want to bring in our conduit locations down here. So we might have several conduit locations. We can bring them all in if we wanted to. Bring them all in? No. So I'm going to have to bring them individually. This is why you need a 3D mouse. I would recommend you a space mouse, 3D mouse, and use it. So let's project some circles in here so we know where we're going to connect to. The other area we may want to connect to is the pull boxes. So I'm going to finish the sketch. I'm going to return, and I will save it. Now, in my case, I put the pull boxes in my underground, so I'm going to make it visible again. And I got my pull boxes showing up here now, and I can come back up to my skeleton. I'll bring that information in here as well. So let's edit that. And this is the sketch we're working on. We're going to edit the sketch. We want to bring in information from the pull box. So we're going to come in here and bring in some information on where we want to bring it in. So we can project edges in here as well. All right, and you can see when you project a circle on that one plane becomes a line in the other plane. And maybe we want to do the same down here as well. I don't know. But we can bring those things in. And again, this is directly out of the training item. Here I'm going to bring in another one. Over here you can see already some have been added, so I'm going to leave those here. We've already have those in here, but I can bring them in again because it's a different sketch. All right, so we have that information into our skeleton. We can finish that, return, and save our model. Always remember to save. So we have that information in the skeleton, and lo and behold, when you come into the Conduit Assembly, we expand that, lo and behold, the skeleton is in here, right there. So we have the skeleton in the Conduit Assembly. So we have the completely separate assemblies, and we can come into here. So I'm going to open up my Conduit Assembly, and now I'll be able to locate where those items are accurately. So if we come in here and come into the skeleton, and I'm going to open it up, and this is the sketch we just created. And you can see how we have some circles here that we can connect to. So I want to make that visible. Once the sketch is visible, then you can leverage it and bring it into other items. So let's say we want to bring that information now into the Conduit Assembly. We want to be able to use it and draw sketches on it. So the sketch right now is in the skeleton. We want to get information into our Conduit Assembly. So we're going to create another sketch on the XY plane. That's our reference plane. I'm going to call this sketch something so I remember what it is. I'll just put webinar on there. It's always good to name sketches. Everything you can name that is reasonable, I would name. And in here you can see that we have some existing items in here, so I can turn that off. But you can see how those two circles are here. And remember, when we brought those circles in, they were on the concrete here. And we have to move them. So we can take the sketch for the webinar. Here, I'll turn the sketch off for visibility reasons. What other sketches on here? Let's edit this sketch. Finish 2D sketch. Let's see what's on here, turned on here. It should be all turned off. Oh, here. I got to turn this visibility off. Sorry about that. There we go. So here's those items here. So let's go back to edit sketch. We need to project the sketch from the skeleton into the sketch to our webinar. So I'm going to come up here. I'm going to edit the sketch we made. We made it on the XY plane. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to project these circles here. So those we know are on the concrete because we saw them there. So what we need to do is add more circles in here. And I use circles mostly because that's what we need to identify it with, something to identify it with. It doesn't absolutely have to be circles, but I'd be fine with circles. And I'm going to make them all equal. I'm going to use as many constraints, sketch constraints as I can. And I want them in line. So let's say we want this guy in line with this one. Then we're coming straight out, right? So we're just using normal Inventor practice here. I want these two in line with one another. And maybe I want it about 2 feet out. So you can see how I'm adjusting the sketch. So my conduit is going to come out of the ground 2 feet from these circles. So if you look in here, that's the type of thing we want to get to. So I'm just showing you how do we get to this point. You can see my different size circles in here. We want to get to that we're not in the concrete and that we're about 2 feet out. And that's how we're creating that and leveraging that information. The other thing we want to do is bring in the information from the sketch here. We want to bring the other information that we brought into our sketch here. You can see our blue lines here. We want to bring that in. And we have our circles down here. We want to bring that in. So let's come up to our webinar sketch, edit that sketch again. And we're going to project these items on as well. So that way we know where our conduit is. Project a circle, and down here we have some lines down here to project. You can see them here. All right, so we can project these edges in there as well. Where is that sketch? We could also bring it up from the body itself if we needed to, but you're better off to bring it in from the sketch itself. So once we have those items in here, then we can start creating paths. If you don't know how the conduit runs, we have to create a path to create our conduit run. So we're going to come out here, finish the sketch, and we're going to look at a finished sketch. Let's turn this visibility off, and let's go back up to sketch 1. This is my primary sketch. And you can see how I have some paths made in here. So that path is just made from the center line. It's just a normal line coming out, coming at a right angle, because we're going to put an elbow in there. The software is going to put the elbow in there, and it's going to come into our projected edge for the pull box. So that's one of our paths. Here's another path we have. We have a path from one point to the other point. That's just that type of path, straight line path. And what we also have is another sketch in here for this split sketch. So we're going to run another one in here too. So let's make that visible and finish the sketch. So we can have these sketches we're going to run on. All right. So this is kind of a beginner thing in the front end here, and as we move along, we'll get more and more advanced. So if you have the XY plane as your top of concrete, that's your reference plane. It doesn't have to be top of concrete, whatever you choose to be your reference point. So if you have a reference point from your civil guys, they say this is a reference point, like for the vertical elevation, you can create everything from that reference point. It varies on how you select your reference point, but you should try and be consistent with all your models. So right away we're going to say, well, we want it to come, along here into here, but what we don't know is how far out of the ground do we want to come. So we want to be able to pop out of the ground at a certain level. So if you look at our conduit out, I've created a plane here for conduit out. So we look at conduit out. So this plane here, I have made it as am I going to come in? I made this plane a certain height above the XY plane. Why can't I view it now? You know, it's always this way. So we look at that distance to my XY plane. So I got it 6 inches out. So my conduit's going to come out at least 6 inches out of the ground here. So that's what we're going to work from. So if I make that sketch available, make that visible, you can see how I projected. I created a sketch on the out plane and projected these circles here. So now I have how far out my conduit's going to come out. So now I can run one piece of conduit. So the first piece of conduit I'm going to run now. And we're going to add more and more conduit as we go. So we're going to come up to our settings. And remember I showed you earlier on the configuration of the database, how we can change our conduit. This is where we're going to see it here. So I got PVC 2-inch radius 24, that family, and I have PVC radius 9.5. So the radius 9.5 is typically what you would buy directly without being specific. They might probably just send you the 9.5. So in this case, I'm going to run the 9.5. The other thing I want to know, how deep of the conduit I want to run. So right here, it's 24 inches deep beneath the sketch line. Well, the sketch line right now is XY plane, but it could be whatever your reference point is going to be. So we need to know how deep we are going to get into our pull box. So right here, I'm going to take a measurement. I know that plane's on the XY plane, my reference plane. And I want to know, I want to bring it in, I guess this deep here, 42 inches deep. So now I have those numbers, and I have how I want to come out. I've created this so it offsets from the pull box, so we're not in the concrete. So we did a number of things here. So I said 42, I believe. So let's change the conduit to 42 inches deep. And hit save. So I'm going to run 2-inch with a certain radius, and I'm going to choose drop plus path. So I want to drop from here, and I'm going to follow this path, and with that, my conduit's going to be made. And we'll go into my pull box quite easily. So it's really quite nice to run it that way. For those who are not aware, this conduit will come up with the number of elbows in our bill of material and the total length of conduit. So if we look in here, you can see parts only, 2-inch conduit. It's going to say varies for at times because we're using the same part number, but we can see we got 600 inches in total of that 2-inch conduit in here. So there's 2-inch conduit elsewhere in this, so it's adding it all up. So we're able to add that up in here. What else it's showing is the number of elbows. So if I have an elbow in here, here's my one elbow that I might be using. 4-inch, 6-inch. There's a 2-inch elbow in here. So it's probably named wrong here, and I got to correct that. But it will be all totalized in here. So we have that ran in here. So now we want to look over here, and we want to run a piece of conduit from this point to this point. And typically, you may not always want to use the same size elbow on our lengths. So if we come up to this sketch here, we're going to edit this sketch, and we'll take a look at it. And here you can see that there's a sketch ends here, and the sketch ends here. And it comes up along here, and it breaks, and it continues here. So there's a break in this line. And typically, I'll use split to make that break, and that split tool is there. So now if I wanted to bring in, let's say I want a larger radius to come down here and a smaller radius down here, I'm able to do that because we set up the content editor earlier. So let's go to below grade tool, settings, and I'm going to run my conduit, let's say 26 inches deep. And I'm going to use the larger radius at the beginning because I want a larger radius up here. So let's grab the 2-inch, 24-inch radius, 26 inches deep, save. And we're going to use the drop plus path. I find the drop plus path is the tool I use most often. And I'm going to come in from this height, and I'm going to follow this path. And it's going to use the larger radius elbow in there. And it's going to end where we put that split. So now we want to run the remaining coming out down here. So I have the out placed here as well, and I can change my settings. I'm going to change it to the smaller radius elbow. Leave it at 26 inches deep, save, and follow drop plus path again. So by leveraging the skeleton and coming in with these items, projecting the where we want our conduit out from and where we want the and where we want our conduit placed. By leveraging the skeleton, we can be very accurate on how we come out of the ground here. So let's go back into this area. You can see how I'm right on the connections that are coming out of this box here, right? I've placed them exactly where I needed them to be. And we come down here, I have my drops in here. So we're able to do that exactly by leveraging the skeleton, and everything's going to be exact because everything's placed consistently. If you go through the substation modeling strategy in the training, we do talk about often we use the ground and root tool. When we bring in a skeleton, it's ground and root. When we bring in items like the 3D conduit, which I'll show shortly, we'd use the ground and root as well. We use it fairly often. So let's look at this assembly here, and let's look at these two little pieces of flex conduit. So let's update and save. Because we have an organized tree, you can see how short this tree is. If I collapse it all, it's not a big tree. Rule of thumb, the smaller your browser is, the better your performance. So we're going to come in here and let's find that assembly. There it is there. Let's open up this assembly. And you can see we have some conduit here. So I'm going to delete the pattern, and I'm going to delete the piece of conduit. And when you use the delete tool in SDS, it deletes not only the conduit, it will delete it from the folder files. So it's deleted right out of your system. So it's a nice way to manage items. When we bring in items here, we bring in these pieces and we're bringing them manually doing normal Inventor practice, and that's the way we locate it. We know we want this 2 feet away from this location, so that's where this was placed, and we know it's going to be in line. So it's fairly easy to place those items. So if I want to place a piece of flex conduit here, I can come up here to settings, conduit, and change my flex conduit to 2-inch. 2-inch PVC, I guess in this case. I'm just going to select that one, save, and you can have that metadata configured to whichever one you want. So here's my flex conduit. I'm going to come from here, maybe a circle here, and come into a depth of some sort. We hit enter. And there's our piece of conduit. Again, this is given to us by length, so we know what length it is. And we want to show the conduit, our above grade conduit, in the above grade assembly. So when we do a section view, we only need to look at the above grade assembly. So time is moving fast on me, so I want to get through and get that 3D conduit in and do some other work. So if I was to finish this, I would do a pattern. I would select my items. And anytime you're going to do a pattern, you want to select not an edge here. That would be wrong. You want to select an origin plane or an edge created from the origin plane. So if you look at here, it's on the X plane. I'm going to create that pattern there. I want 2 of them, and maybe it's 8. Maybe it's 6. You know, it's going to be round numbers, so you're not going to be too goofy with those numbers. Am I able to place my pieces there? So that's how that piece is there. But the key thing here is that you put your above grade conduit in your above grade assembly, and your below grade in your below grade. That way you don't have the interference between the two. The other last piece I want to run is, so you guys see the 3D conduit tool, is when I'm looking at this 3D conduit tool, you can see what I have to do to put that in. So I have to create a whole separate part with that 3D conduit tool. And we can open this, and you can see our line here. So this is a 3D line. You can see it's made from a sketch in here, and we create that 3D sketch. Once we have that 3D sketch, it will take straight line 3Ds and we'll take splines. Our update in April, we're going to be adding more to it so that it works with all types of splines. So in April, we should have this working much better. So we have this 3D sketch, and we're going to create a piece of conduit on that 3D sketch. We're going to look at it Here's our 3D Conduit Run. We're going to look at our settings. And we're going to change this to, I don't know, 3-inch, I guess. Yeah, 3-inch here. Depth doesn't matter. With the 3D Conduit options, this is new coming out. We'll be able to put this information in. I'm going to save this. And with that, we should be able to run our 3D Conduit along this line here. You can see that, and if you got to keep in mind, I'm running the beta version, so there's a little bit of a thing pop up there, but it's working fine. There's no errors in it. You can see that is in that whole separate part piece. Okay, so now we have that 3D Conduit Run. So that's some basic conduit, below grade conduit that I wanted to talk about. I want to also talk about a bit of above grade stuff too. But one of the key things there is bringing the information from the model into the skeleton, from the skeleton back into our conduit model, and we work from there. And that way we have very exacting work done. So the other item I want to bring up is we come into the, I'm going to change my project, and I want to show above grade conduit because I think it's really worthwhile to, if I run out of time, I want to make sure I get the above grade conduit done. So let's look at this guy here. So here's a transformer island. It's made of 3 island assemblies. So it's a sub-assemblies of a sub-assemblies. So we got these 3 guys in here. And here we can see you got above grade conduit in here. So let's look at how we're going to do that. So let's open up this middle guy. Where's the middle guy? And as typically with the islands, you can see I put as much information as I can in an island. I don't continue my grounds down below my last joint. That's where I ended. And you'll see when we do a little drawing of this. So if you can see we have conduit in here already. I'm going to come to my below grade tools. I'm going to delete this piece of conduit. I'm going to delete this one. And remember, this deletes it out of the file path too. So this is the type of thing we're going to work on. I'm going to delete this guy here too. So items like this are placed manually. These elbow connections and that. These are placed manually in there. There's different ways of placing it, but I usually place them manually. And then when you're doing this type of thing, you're going to have these lined up, or they should be lined up. Your design should be that way. If it isn't, we'll show you up here. So if I was going to put a piece of conduit in here, remember we went into the content editor. We added items in our content editor. So let's say I'm going to put an EMT piece of conduit in here. So I've changed the content editor to show EMT, and maybe it's a EMT, what size is it? I wrote it down here. I think it's 1 inch. So maybe it's EMT 1 inch, and I'll hit save. And with that, I can use my Flex Conduit Run. And I can come in here and select some circles. And there's my conduit run. All right. And that's how this one would be done, the same thing. You just put in your Flex Conduit. I like to add more than one circle so there's some depth in some direction to it as well. The other guy up here, I want to show this one up here. This is a key one. This is what makes it look nice. When we come in here, you can see how these are bent to where we want to do, because a lot of times you bend them. My coworker said they used to bend them across his knee, and we want to be a little more exact than that, I think. But we can be. And maybe it doesn't really matter. So if I place this piece of conduit now in here, let's pick this guy here to here. We come in here, and we're going to come in here and come in there, in here and pick there and go everywhere. And you can see we have a shape. But let's say we don't like that shape. That's too much of a gray, it's not the shape I want. So let's delete that. So this is another thing I want to make sure that we understand what we can do. I want to come up to the assemble. I'm going to do a pattern. I'm going to do a pattern of this guy. This is just a temporary pattern, and then again, because I've got good habits, I'm always going to follow my habits. And I'm going to bring this down like 6 inches. Oh, I don't want it that way. I want it that way. Well, maybe it's more than 6. Let's say 12. All right. So now I have that piece there, and maybe I don't have to do anything with this bottom one. So I'm going to just, this is going to give me the path that I need for my conduit. So below grade, I come in here, point. I want to come through that point. And remember, we still want to come through my piece here and down. So this is giving me more of a path that I may want. Now I have that pattern. I don't need that pattern anymore. I can delete it. And that gives me more of a path that somebody at site is going to do. They're going to be having a little bit steeper angles when they're bending it over to their leg. But anyway, that's how we're doing above grade conduit. And if you look at the above grade conduit, it's all in here. And if we don't get into the below grade stuff, the below grade is in a separate assembly. So if we save this and bring it into the drawing view, let's open up the drawing view. So you can see our pieces are in here. We have the conduit. Our bill of material is going to give us a length of each of these items. So if I came in here and did a bill of material, can't believe the time's running out. Does anybody matter if I go past the time? Let's say I'm going to put that bill here. Okay, it needs to be updated, but in here you can see we have our conduit fittings, all our conduit fittings. If you read the substation modeling strategy, we talk about, here we got 13 feet of our RMC1. That's what we just placed. So we talk about in substation modeling strategy empty parts. And if we look at this assembly, we have a number of empty parts in here. So I'm going to come up to my assemble, bill of material, enable. You can see we have empty parts in here. They either have an icon, like here, some bolt washers, because I don't need to show them. I just need them in the bill of material. I just don't want to take the time to place them. I don't want the software to generate them. I just want them in here, and we have some other ones in here. So if I come up to here and I come into file name, I'll put it beside the part number here. So typically I would say this is an empty part. I'll have an EP on the end. I may want a model with a nut all modeled in there as well. So I have an empty parts and I have a not in a modeled piece possibly. And the same as here, this is an empty part. If you look what this is a piece of conduit. This steel hub might be inside of the item here, right? It might be inside this box or it might be inside this box. So there's no sense to have it modeled. We just need it in the body. So when we place those in, we ground and root them. The great ground and root tool will ground and root those empty parts in the model. We want to ground and root them to the origin so they're not scattered around and cause a view problem, a view representation problem. All right, I'm going to move on. I want to get into the drawings. I got 10 minutes left. I wanted to be done and doing Q&A by now, but it's still important to get into the drawing world. What did I do there? Here we go. So what I showed you earlier was this guy here. Right? We want to get this type of idea on how do we get that idea in here. So if I come up into my levels of detail, I'm going to do this a little bit faster than what I would normally have done. And I'm going to get into my representations. And I'm going to come into my conduit plan level of detail. I'm going to activate that. So a lot of times when you read the substation modeling strategy, we talk about things and we talk about linked levels of detail. I would recommend using this. And I can update this, but you can see we got information in here. And when we look at our underground, I'm going to open this up. And we're going to look in here, and in here is this conduit Paths item. So if I edit this, this Conduit Path has a sketch in here, and we projected the paths from the conduit sketches into this part. So this is an individual part. It's a part all by itself, and we're able to project those paths in here. Even if those paths, if you recall, have a right angle, we can also put an angle on those. We can put a radius in here. What I do with this path, then, you can see all of my extrusions in here. If I take this extrusion here and delete it or suppress it, let's just turn off the visibility. If I was to, I thought I would bring it in. I got it in twice. That's bad. All right, so if I wanted to bring that path in, I can leave it as a line. But what I like to do, I think I have more options when I extrude it. So I'm going to extrude that line. And I'm going to extrude this line here. And it's going to give me an error. And I'm going to ignore that error because I'm smarter than the software. I'll come in here. I want it 6 inches. And I tend to go this way just so I see it. And what I'm doing is just extruding a surface on that. And that way I can see it in my drawings. So let's close this. Close this. I had to return first. Now when I create a drawing of this view, I can come up here and create that drawing. Here's my conduit plan. And you can see my lines are in here. So you look at this. First of all, this view is level of detail conduit plan. When we expand this, you can see my underground conduit plan. Here's my conduit paths. Right click, I want this visible, and I can come into my properties. I'm going to make this entire idea is dashed and say OK. And that's bringing all our lines in dashed. All right. Once we have that, then we can create a leader detail. So if I come into annotate and I want to put a leader in here, I'm going to look at my leader type, and I want to bring a leader conduit. And I just have the origin, boom, and call this 1 line of 2-inch conduit, right? And we can bring that in. So I've used my styles. I use my styles editor in Inventor to create those leaders the way I want them to be. So there's a SD conduit dimension style with the leader of what we wanted. So that's how we're bringing that information in. So there's a lot there. I went a little bit fast, but it's worthwhile to see. We get that detail in here. So I hope I covered everything I wanted to. I hope we're okay. I can do a little Q&A. Although it's 10 minutes left, I will stay online for as long as I need to be. I'm fine with that. And I'm going to start reading some questions. So if anyone has a question, they can put it in there. What I also wanted to mention, and we're going to talk about this about the content editor, is that when I work with the content editor, I create a database table in Excel, and that helps me edit it. You can copy and paste, and we're going to talk about that next month. But I just want to, for those, a little forwarding type of thing, I can take this information, I can copy it, I can edit what I need for my conduit or for any of the tables, and I'm able to place them into my content editor, and I'm able to place them into these tables. So it's something we're going to talk about next webinar. Okay, so I have Rick. Rick, how do you handle the XY plane when the top of concrete varies? And that's exactly what I was mentioning. You want to keep that XY plane a consistent reference across the board. So if it's not top of concrete, you can select any type of reference point as long as you have that stable. So if the civil guys say, we have this point, this reference point here, we want this as a vertical reference location, you use that. Dennis, when deleting conduit when using Balt, will the copy of the Balt be deleted? The copy in your work area will be deleted. So when you sign it in, it will no longer be part of that assembly and will be deleted from your folder. Adam, has below grade update been added? Has below grade update been added? I'm not sure if you can explain that a little bit further to your next step. We've done a number of updates to the 3D conduit and some betterments in there, so I'm not sure what that question is. Lupe, can you use the conduit information for pull calculations? No, we don't have that capability as yet. We have different methods of that are coming up of showing how many elbows in a line and that would help you with those calculations, but we don't have anything on that pull calculation as yet. So if anybody else has questions, the conduit and grounding update, like the above grade. Has below grade update been added? The conduit and grounding update, like the above grade. Update. I'm not sure if you're meaning update. Oh, I see. An update tool, if you change your path of the conduit, maybe that's what's being asked. Right now, we don't have that link to be able to do the update. If we move the sketch, the conduit has to be rerun. So you use the delete tool, it would delete all the folders, and then you change your sketch, and then you update that path. You update the path and create the new conduit on there. It would be nice to have that link to be able to change the sketch and do that. But if you've used other tools with that type of thing, it's great in the wires and bus because we don't have a sketch to modify. But once we modify a sketch, it gets into a little bit heavy for the software we have, like all of us have, Inventor, to calculate that new change. So I'm not too eager to put that in right now or press for it unless we can find a way to make it a late load on the software. If you ever use the tube and sketch, the tube and pipe tool that Autodesk has, it's a very heavy tool and it takes a long time to do things with that, and I would not want to be in that situation. Any other questions? Okay, when you annotated the drawing 1-2 conduit, why did you have to type this info? Seems like the information is affiliated with the part. Because we are projecting the line, we're only identifying that line. So we're not actually identifying the conduit part. We can identify the part with a leader in Inventor, like if I come in here, but it's got to be the part. So when we came in here, we had that plan view open. I can come in here and create a leader on here and say, well, I want this to be properties from the model and I want it to be description and put it in here. And we can do that because it's the actual model. But when we're coming in with these lines, we're actually projecting the line, so the data isn't carried across from the model. If we were bringing the model in here, and we have a whole bunch of models in here, this would be very thick lines, and we get into that case of the, where was that drawing? Let's go back into here. If we were to do this type of thing, there's spaghetti junction here. if we were to do this and did a drawing of this, this would be so thick in lines in the plan view that it would be hard to read. So we don't really want to bring in the model. We just want to, we're just bringing in the sketch lines. Any other questions for today? All right. So Steve and White Dragon. All right. So I think that went pretty well. I think I covered most of everything I wanted to talk about, and I really like the stress, the skeleton, the use of that, leveraging that skeleton information. Okay, Dwayne, go ahead.
I was going to say you winded it up right to high noon Central Time, so good job, Steve. Well, if there are not any questions, appreciate everyone's participation in the webinar. I hope it was beneficial. If you'd like to view or share this with your colleagues that were not able to attend, this will be again posted on our SBS YouTube channel that Steve mentioned earlier.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.